This is the upbeat to what I regard as one of the festival highlights for this year. Okay, everything's online, everything's virtual, new kind of audience, but a very exciting platform and various platforms to present the festival to the world. So this new work, a new topography of love, give us something about the background or the thinking behind where this has come from.
Great.
John, do you want to chip in?
Well, sure. I mean, I suppose we were so excited to write this. Now, it didn't start in this place, of course, because whenever we were starting to make this, it was going to be a real thing with real people and working with young people up as part of the festival. Now it's moved online and things have changed because of that. But I think that the core of the idea behind it has always stayed the same, that we wanted to write something that sort of spoke about the circumstances of today, and it's moved maybe more towards sort of a COVID today, but it's very much talking about the planet and our thoughts about society and maybe where we can we can maybe learn a better direction of how to live as humans if we look closer to the world around us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of, I think what we've already started off from, John, I suppose, was the idea that it's kind of about examining all the sort of dysfunctional things that are happening in the world, the COVID virus being one of those things, and the sort of general fragility of humans. And I suppose looking towards the future when we come out of this, what will change? Will we think differently? Will we approach things differently? Will we reconsider the things that have actually got us into this situation in the first place? And I think that's where your words have really kind of captured all of that.
Well, speaking of the words, Brian, just when you mentioned that and the opening line, I remember when you sent me through the text and the opening line stopped me in my tracks because it's the singing stopped.
Yes. Yeah, and in fact, that's exactly what did happen in many ways. As we were talking about in the symposium, Nolan, it's the difficulties of singing in this particular time. And I suppose in terms of if I could just talk a little bit about this sort of the process that has led this, because in many ways, as John's words do sort of capture, is that we were trying to do something which was about people in a room, and actually lots of people in a room, and a community chorus and singers from all parts of the world and stuff connecting into this. And I think what we've had to do all the time is reinvent the way we kind of do this and how we present something and what it is we're going to present, because the whole part of the choral festival, the choral tradition, is just about people being in the room, being in the one space, audiences being in the one space, listening in that 3D environment. And of course, we're trying to make a choral piece where no one's allowed to get together, no one's allowed to sing, no venues are open, audiences aren't allowed in. It's kind of like everything you're not allowed to do is the environment that we're trying to make this piece in. And that has been such an interesting process, because what we're going to hear tonight is essentially a new Topography of Love Part 1. It's actually just the first movement in a series of responses, if you like, to this situation that we're in. And actually, in making even just this sort of 4-minute piece, that has grown out of a series of experiments which have worked and have not worked, and so on. And so it's like a big curve of understanding how we can make something which connects, but isn't a kind of substitute or something for what would happen in a live situation.
And in many ways, Brian, the sort of the process or the evolution of this piece is not dissimilar to how the festival itself has been put together, to be very honest, and how I think we're responding to the situation in all aspects of the lives that we're leading currently. So it's a reflection of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. I mean, people have said to us as the planning team within the festival, are you on plan B or C or D? And we said, that's a distant memory. You know, we're so far beyond plans A, B, C, and D. And I feel the way this piece has progressed isn't dissimilar to that.
Yeah. No, I would totally agree with you, actually. And I think one of the things that has become clear, and as I say, this piece is approximately 4 minutes long. It's the first movement, if you like, in a series of movements, which we have had to kind of rethink, and we'll reposition as the year unfolds, and we'll release those different movements at different times. So it's an ongoing process in some ways. But I think one of the things that has become really apparent is this idea that we're not trying to capture like a live performance. You know, we're trying to respond to the limitations. And so the piece has a lot of kind of layered text and has a lot of superimposed textual effects and so on, which in some ways just add to the overall sense of dislocation, I suppose, or disorientation that I think we're all kind of feeling. It's quite a simple piece in some ways, but there's a disorientation, a kind of that feeling, that sort of blanket of anxiety, I think, that we all experience, which has been brought about by this situation, which I think we've tried to respond to in a fairly simple way, but in a sort of fairly authentic way, I think, you know.
No, I think that's true. I mean, I think that what this piece is our first tentative steps as we all walk through this moment in time, and as we all move towards something that's going to be very different. And so we're exploring this time. I mean, if you wanted to give this piece a subtitle, you know, it would be making a choral piece in the time of Corona. And it's maybe the same for the festival, making a choral festival in the time of Corona. And it's a passage that we're all moving through. It's a time that's very changing, and we're all like exploring new ideas and how do we do this and how do we do that. And that's why it's exciting as well, because it's opening little doors for us all. I think we've all discovered this. I'm sure you've discovered this with the festival, Donal, where at the beginning it can be quite heavy to change things, but once you start changing and going in different directions, you go, oh, that's really great. Why did we not think about that before? We'll keep that.
I agree, John, and we've used the phrase frequently, you know, again, within the core planning team, we have to be fleet of foot, if you like, because it has actually happened. We'd have a plan in the morning, and then circumstances way beyond our control might dictate to us that by the afternoon those plans have completely shelved or gone out the window or whatever. So it is that constant change. But once I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we become comfortable with that constant shifting of sands, but you become more accustomed to coping with change and having to be mentally alert all the time, hopefully imaginatively alert to possibilities and new possibilities that hadn't previously been thought of. And I think I certainly hear that in your words, John, and I think I hear it in how Brian is expressing that in his music as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things I think that I suppose were sort of prominent in our mind when we're making it, and that is this sense of it being a kind of introverted time, but also a time which you're sort of trying to look towards a future, but yet there's this kind of slight kind of constant inner dialogue within you, and the world has sort of closed down a little bit. So I suppose what we tried to do was kind of capture some of that reflection, some of that meditation, but also coping with this kind of inner sense of your voice, of your inner voice. And I suppose we tried to layer that that dichotomy, I suppose, that's happening, and everyone's sort of dealing with it. Everyone's dealing with an internal mind process and how you get your own mind around all this stuff, but also trying to think, oh, this is also a time to rethink everything and reimagine everything. So there's this kind of constant dichotomy of struggling and also thinking about, well, things can be better from this, you know. And it's just it's a very simple little piece in many ways. But yeah, it's a sort of, it's just trying to capture that dichotomy of thought and feeling that we're all experiencing.
Well, I remember in our very early conversations, Brian, when this piece was going to look, as you have already explained, quite different from what it is about to be presented as. And in terms of, I mean, when we consider that it was originally conceived as an ambitious project for primary school children.
Exactly.
for young voices, young minds, full of bursting imagination and so on, but that they were going to feed in to how the piece was originally conceived and how it would subsequently be shaped. And of course, that, if we want to call that plan A, we quickly had to move away because it involved rehearsals, it involved talking with the children, it involved them developing the story as well, or the text and the ideas behind that. So we've come a long way from there. But one thing I do recall you emphasizing at the time, those very early discussions, was that it must have a relevance. It must belong to the time in which we are living. Now, I think that relevance in the time in which we're living has changed beyond what we imagined it was going to be months ago, nearly a year ago now, when we first started talking about it. But I think it is reflective, and the process has necessitated it being reflective of where we're at and how we experience the music making and the creative process together at the moment.
I think there's just something about I suppose as well, whenever we were making it, and as I say, you know, this little piece that we're going to listen to is kind of this sort of it's come through a lot of filters, if you like, to get to this point. And I think there is part of, I think what we're trying to do is kind of capture a certain kind of stasis that is sort of inescapable in this particular time. So in some ways, it doesn't go anywhere. It just stays there, you know, it just hangs there. And I think the nice thing about this process, Donald, is that I suppose, you know, to say this is a new Topography of Love Part 1, I envisage there being a Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, Part 5, maybe even, which are similar reflections of how things progress and move. And, you know, hopefully we'll get to that point where we are able to bring in maybe a sort of community chorus aspect to this and build it into slightly different areas, you know. The way this was done, I suppose, was we recorded lots of things separately and have kind of layered them and combined the speech and the vocals, you know. But I think as time progresses, we will have a different response of something, or a different interpretation of how things are moving. So it feels like the beginning of something, I suppose, is what I'm saying, rather than sort of beginning and end of something.
And John, do you feel the same in terms of how the text has been interpreted, or how it is now about to be presented?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's funny you come back to the first line, because when all of this sort of kicked off, we had started writing a piece, and the piece was all going to be, and it was all inspired by, well, what happens when the singing stops, you know? How do you, you know, and that's a big question, you know, and it's something we've seen happening across the country. The singing has literally stopped for, you know, hundreds of choirs, for hundreds of people. And that idea that by stopping that, oh, what happens then, you know? And I suppose what we tried to do, you know, what I tried to do with the words was to take that as a moment of, yeah, as Brian said, stasis, when everything stopped, but then to flip over into already that sort of moment afterwards where, you know, there are stronger forces out there that maybe that if we listen to a little bit closer, whether that be the forces of nature, the forces of animals, the forces of the environment around us, then there's probably a lot of things to learn from that. And I think that that embeds itself into the piece that we have now, you know, and you feel that there's a sense of there's something of the ocean in the piece that we have now, and the continual lapping of the waves and the sort of eternity of that moving and swelling. I'm very excited to share it with everybody.
Well, I think that's really a nice lead into actually listening to the work, and you know, because our belief, of course, as passionate believers and singers, and how important music is to our very essence, the singing can't stop. The singing is such a part of what we are that it must continue regardless of circumstances, and it's up to us to always look for the solutions within the difficulties that we're presented with. And I think that this piece is beginning to express that. And personally, I look forward so much to moving beyond movement 1 of A New Topography of Love and seeing the world that we're going to live in and experience in movements 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I'm just referring to the last line in the current text, which says, "Never take the gift of your voice lightly." And I think that's an eloquent intro into A New Topography of Love, movement 1.
Singing stopped. The silence reigned. The emperor flew off in his new jet plane. Temples crumbled. People mumbled. Words were lost in the last great tumble. Worms crawled in and filled the spaces, now free of meaning and grammatical cases. There is no truth. There are no lies. Forsaken once, forsaken twice. Squeak the squads of hungry mice. You never learn, you never listen, ever see a dead sea. Remember this, write it down. Collect it up, spread it out upon the fields. Ever see it dead sparkles? There is no truth, there are no lies. Within this wisdom. Forsaken once, forsaken twice, squeak the squads of hungry mice. You never learn, you never listen, ever see a dead sea. Remember this, write it down, sang the wheels of the round. Kindness matters in all its forms. Listen carefully, think this through. Squealed the bats that no longer flew. There is no truth, there are no lies. Within this wisdom hides. All there is joy's chaos.